and I thought it would be a good time to see Canada. So
of course,
I had no intention of turning myself in and turning myself over to the hands of the these entities that one, I don't trust, and two, have a very documented history of persecuting, murdering, and framing activists and groups that they view as subversive and they view as a threat to the establishment and the status quo. So I did everything I could to remain undetected, and yet I still was taking some risks. I was in Canada and I was doing a lot of activism. I did a lot of work with homelessness and poverty issues with Food Not Bombs, a group that collects food that's going to otherwise be wasted and then donates it. It prepares it for free and serves free meals to the community. And then I did a lot of protesting the war in Iraq, because that's when, of course, Bush re-escalated the war that never ended from his father in '91. So. I was taking many risks, and a lot of my friends were arrested at some of these protests, and I certainly wasn't, completely underground. I was definitely putting myself out there. And eventually I was arrested. Almost 2 years I was on the run in Canada. And then in 2004, March 13th of 2004, I was arrested, and I ended up being incarcerated and confined for almost 6 years. And that tenure just ended recently.
You said you went to Canada and you became involved in activities that along the same themes, so because saving trees and trying to distribute food. And what triggered there was a time, people know about it, but there was a time when Canada was some kind of safe haven for persons who had a different point of view on matters that are of interest to us all.
Absolutely.
And whereas most recently it would seem that Canada, I wouldn't call it the colony of the United States, but
it's a colony of England.
or a colony of England, which has become a colony of so at least in major matters.
Sure.
And where did this happen in Canada? What location of Canada was this?
Well, I was all over Canada in almost all the provinces. I did a lot of activism in Halifax and Nova Scotia, and then I spent a lot of time in BC, British Columbia, and did a lot of activism there. And that's where I ended up being arrested. And then I was held in Canada for almost 4 years, appealing to the Canadian government, appealing extradition, and going through immigration matters, because just as you mentioned, I was basically maintaining that I should receive political asylum or refugee status because of my political ideology. I was being targeted and prosecuted. And those days of the Dodge drafters are long gone. In the 60s and 70s, there were people that fled to Canada and were granted asylum and refugee status. And the sad truth is that there are people now that have gone AWOL from the Iraq and Afghani wars, protesting obviously the foreign policy and the military invasions, and they fled to Canada. While I was incarcerated, I was hearing these things on the news. They fled to Canada to seek asylum, and Canada booted them back to the States to be court-martialed and be punished for for refusing to murder people for oil in the Mideast.
There is such a dichotomy. There's a contrast between the intensity with which people like you are persecuted, really, is the word, and the nonchalance with which real criminal are let go. I was, many of us, at least many people have, I don't watch television, but I watched C-SPAN hearing on Goldman Sachs. And here was one person who, I paraphrase what he said because I don't remember accurately, he calls himself the fabulous fab, and he created what he defined Frankenstein products, and out of pure intellectual masturbation, which he wanted then to sell to orphans and widows. They're a toxic product, and so he wrote in an email, that to me, if that is not, and they did this, as you know, they were selling things that they know they were fraud, and these people go free, no questions, some questions asked, but they still are allowed to circulate, and they even carry with themselves an aura of being smart, or something of the nature, which is real crimes.
Yeah.
And when you have, in your case, or in the case of the movement, you are obviously persons who put your life on the line for all of us here, because, and you are treated like criminals, like the Americans when they tried to become independent from England. They were terrorists too.
Yeah.
Sometimes people do not realize this, because it's easy to label someone a terrorist when it is convenient. It has been said, I don't know whether you confirm it or not, that the FBI or whatever is attempting to infiltrate environmental groups,
Sure.
In order to preempt their actions, or perhaps brought them to heel, whatever. What information would you have on this?
Oh, they already have, and they do. And, a perfect case, unfortunately, is Eric McDavid, who was just sentenced to 19 years for a crime that he never committed. And it was the masterminding in the agenda of an undercover agent known as Anna, who acted as an activist, who then Eric fell in love with, and they were partners. And then she plotted this whole scheme of blowing something up. I'm not even quite sure what the conspiracy was, but they never actually carried out the action, and it was completely entrapment. Yet he was found guilty, and is now serving 19 years for such acts. She was an undercover agent paid by the FBI to do these things. So, and this is not an isolated incident. As folks probably know, the FBI has a long history of COINTELPRO and infiltrating, disrupting, disseminating misinformation to discredit, neutralize, disrupt, and dismantle any group, organization, or person that they view as subversive and that challenges the status quo, whether it's the Black Panther Party, the Civil Rights Movement, the environmental movement, the American Indian movement. All of these have had severe infiltration and FBI activity to try to render them powerless.
And so I was trying to go through your last year. So after 4 years in Canada, were you, excuse me, I should know this, but were you able to go out on bail, or just kept you there?
No, I was confined for almost 5.5 years. Almost 4 of that was in Canada, and then I was extradited back to the States the last day of February in 2008. And then I sat downtown here at MCDC, Multnomah County Detention Center, going through the proceedings to either go to trial or to take a plea. So that was a 6-month period of working all that out. And I eventually took the plea because I was looking at a life sentence. So even though no one was hurt during these 2 arsons, I was looking at a life sentence and labeled as the T word.
Yeah.
Even though I wasn't charged with any terrorist legislation. So I didn't want to take the chance of, I certainly wanted to take it to trial and beat it and be vindicated and be free. And I also didn't want to take the chance of being found guilty and spend the rest of my life in prison.
There is another gentleman, I forgot his name now, is Jeff Luer, I don't know what you... And he was, there are some traits, there's some similarities, because you and all this, you don't act for any personal gain. One could say you act for personal loss. You put your life on the line as you did, and yet you are considered worse from the point of view of the justice system. The justice system considers you worse than criminal that really hurt people bad, or either directly or indirectly, so to speak, like as Goldman Sachs, and then these rating agencies, they were giving AAA rating to companies that they know they were tricksters. It's a sad state of affair.
It really is. There's, you look at what's going on right now in the Gulf of Mexico, and it is the world's worst or at least in U.S. history, the worst environmental catastrophe and disaster, certainly the worst oil spill in U.S. history. And it's still leaking. Some estimates are 200,000 gallons a day. And, you know, and BP just had a horrible explosion recently in Texas.